Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por venir a esta octava y penúltima sesión del ciclo Europa, con la presencia de Thomas Raynaud, de París. La verdad es que me hace especial ilusión porque hace 10 años en el concurso 2G le dimos el primer premio de la Laguna de Venecia. Les he ido siguiendo los pasos y aquí está, 10 años después del concurso, pues esta charla. Para esta ocasión pues he invitado a los TAC, aquí está Mireia Luzárraga, perdón. Mira que me lo he ensayado. Luzárraga, y nada, que presentarán. También como noticia, la próxima sesión, por cuestiones de calendario del invitado, será el 20 de junio, o sea que no serán cada 15 días ya, será la última y cerrará Jan de Wilder del estudio belga de Wilder Taylor. Así que hasta el 20 de junio no habrá otra sesión. Bueno, os dejo con Mireia y con Tomás.
Okay, so thank you very much, Moises. So, as everybody knows, the presentation of an artistic or intellectual practice should be a clear exposition of those aspects that make remarkable certain work. But in order to do that, as we can imagine, it is essential to have a deep knowledge on the work, or even, why not, a certain affinity with those principles that articulated. And in this case, we don't comply with all of these prerogatives, but we accepted the challenge that Moises gave us, and especially embracing these possible enrichments from the pairings that he usually gives us away. So we suggest you to play a kind of a game, the game of the construction of a character, the construction of the Thomas Raynaud that we figured out that we came to know with the few tools that we have in our office, which is basically the viewing of the web page. And the game will consist on contrasting this Thomas Raynaud that we think that we know from our positions and subjectivities with the real Thomas Raynaud that we have here. So, to do this, as we mentioned, we have decided to work only and exclusively with his webpage, understanding that it would be the most reliable and rich source controlled by the office itself to communicate his practice. So we decided to start with the text. And so we download all the text on his webpage, which is this amount of text. And the first thing we could notice is that there weren't many words there, about 1,700 for a total of 40 entries, each of them regarding a different project. So this means like 42 words per project, and we think this fact is crucial to explain Thomas' architecture. So each project contains a very brief written description, which is disconnected of topics as climatic, constructive or social context, and it's especially focused in other aspects as the geometrical or spatial definitions that is mainly provided with images. So from this point, we tried to figure out which were the most repeated words in this minimum text to check in a fast way if they were recurring topics. So we introduced this into a text analysis software. And we discovered that the most appealing words are issues as the name, the occupation, the kind of assignment, that didn't help much to unveil Thomas' interest, but they reinforced this idea of a certain abstraction when it comes to explain his architectural proposals. Same thing happened when we analyzed the series of 2 or 3 words that in a consecutive way were the most repeated. Kinds of assignments, the frequent work through collaboration, and the work both for private or public institutions, as for instance, museum. So after the text, what we tried to make is something similar with the drawings. We downloaded all the drawings included on the web page, and the first thing we noticed very clearly is from the 24 drawings, 42 of them are floor plans, 6 axonometric views, and just 1 section. And I think it's very nice, no, to notice this. Mm-hmm. I think it's crucial also to explain your work, no? So our conclusion is that we generally understand that the sections try to explain the spatiality of a certain place or the anthropomorphic relationships that a place could have through scalar materiality. But the floor plans, on the contrary, would speak about how to organize those spaces and how the relationships are among them. So if sections are more figurative or representational, plans are more abstract documents, no? And I think it's like... So if we zoom in these plans, we can see line drawings, black lines without dimension or technical references. most of them without furniture and generally with the level of detail typical of not big scales. They are drawings that are like mental projections focused almost exclusively in the definition of spaces. And the last thing, after the text and the drawings, what we did is the same with the images. We picked up all those images that made a reference to the spatiality of the proposals of Thomas, and the first thing we figured out that they share a very reduced color palette, so we grouped them in these 3 groups, and we took them to a color managing software in order to decode those RGB mode, more characteristics of his practice, and the result is that there are these 3 colors that we could consider as neutral in architecture without symbolic or rhetoric connotations like other colors could have, which are this very light gray, which is like a white, a dark gray, and a brown, and with very clear proportions regarding the presence on your work, being the white predominant. So in conclusion, the absence of colors, or said it in another way, the most abstract colors, or with a less meanings, or the more pragmatic colors, no? The colors that would not divert our attention from the real interests of the proposal. And finally, and this is the last study that we tried to remark a little more on the geometry, to research how Thomas deals with the formal construction of his work. So another thing that we saw very evident in your work is that there is a big amount of projects that are embedded on a built reality. So retrofitting projects or expansion projects or updating of spaces. And we decided to focus on them for considering that from these situations that are a priori more difficult, we could come up to more reliable conclusions. So we selected 4 different plans, as we said, embedded on a previous construction, and what we did is to zoom in these plans in the moment in which these 2 realities, the previous and the new, met each other. No? So these are the zooms, sorry for the resolution. So we found out is how these relationships that we could consider as strained or tense relationships are produced. Both realities recognize each other, but they don't establish a fluid dialogue, but they rather live together observing each other. So on the one hand we have the geometries more or less hybrid or dirty or of the pre-existent reality, and on the other hand the clean, abstract, Cartesian and endless geometries of the new proposals. So in the conclusion, after this study, we had to do a kind of a profile of Thomas Raynaud from these quick, simple and subjective considerations. We would say that we think we have discovered in the slippery work of Thomas a practice where the ideas try to travel a minimum distance up to its materialization in the project or the built work. But this apparent quickness would position Thomas in a stylistic continuity with the diagrammatic architecture of the contemporaneous Japanese architects, making his work pure, simple and geometrical. But in the case of Thomas, these qualities are not only applied to the materialization of your architecture, but also to the construction of ideas that will guide each project, being this element the one that is the most characteristic about his work. So this apparent simplicity in the configuration of the idea, that in most cases would be more appropriate to consider as rotundity, is what we believe gives the work of Thomas that halo of sophistication and elegance, sometimes even impenetrability, that surrounds all his work. So the apparent non-working with shapes, material or color would be a result of reflections that orbit almost exclusively around abstract issues, such as the distribution of programs or its usage possibility, making his proposals both strong and rhetoricless. So Thomas Raynaud is an architect from the École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris and established his office in 2007. His work has been awarded with the Album des Jeunes Architectes et Paysagistes 2010 prize by French Ministry of Culture, among others, and he has been invited to participate in numerous international exhibitions as the 14th International Architects Biennale in Venice, curated by OMA, the AA Gallery in London or the Axis Gallery in Tokyo. It's a pleasure for us to introduce Thomas. I leave you here.
So thank you, Miriam, for this diagnosis. It's quite, yeah, it's like a little bit like a therapy. So thank you. So thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you, Moses, for inviting me. And yeah, it's here. And so I will show you several projects, around 10, also with my bad English, so sorry for that. But so several projects, and some of them are built, some of them will stay forever on papers, and some of them are under development. And they emerge obviously from different contexts, but they share a kind of same logic, a same starting point, a same postulate, that which could be that architecture is a pure act of separation, so a relatively strong action for the best or for the worst, to divide something. And this act of separation poses the question of the limit as a fundamental element of the formalization of an architecture. And the limit is always an affair of three objects: the two limited object and the limiting object. And at the very moment when you draw a limit on the ground, even a weak limit, like with a stick on the sand, you confront yourself directly to an affair of architecture. It's already a definition of a spatial organization, a definition of a hierarchy between two spaces, the definition of an inside, the definition of an outside, on both sides of these limits, a small space included in a larger one. And by this separation, you can link between these two spaces, just simply a relation. And we could maybe look at architecture and define it in a very laconic way, by provoking relationship between space produced by operation of separation. And it's a way also to produce specific condition on a pre-existing environment, to increase or impoverish the constructed situation. And it contains always the question of establishing an order with or without a previous one. And at the beginning of my practice, I started to work on several projects that share almost the same context. The context of dealing with a kind of heritage. Technically, we can call them a renovation project or a refurbishing project. Project that question a pre-existing architecture, not necessarily in the sense of the conservation of a cultural heritage or through the medium of architecture, like monuments or historical constructed landmark, but more on a banal situation occupied by a sort of construction. And if there is a reason of this repetition of subjects, it's maybe because for a young French office, it's easier to have access to this kind of comment. And also because probably I'm not so interested by object, or rather by designing objects as a professional practice. And maybe it seems paradoxical for an architect, but as a primary motivation, I'm much more curious about the relationship between object and the objects themselves. And hopefully I'm not the first one or the only one. And the first project I will show you mainly concern the question of economy of means through a programmatic indeterminacy. Economy of means, because it's a project with a very low budget, where money could be a problem, and programmatic indeterminacy, because we start the project without a defined program, but with an existing building, with an architecture which proposes already something. So it's in the city of Marseille, in the south of France, near the industrial harbor. So it's the blank polygon on the picture, and the building is an Aberdeen factory in the sort of wasteland. So it's an industrial building from the end of the 19th century, and it was at the beginning of the sail loft for the boat. And it contains a certain capacity, a certain efficiency. 3 empty floors produced by a rational mixed structure of stone and cast iron columns, concrete flooring, wood frame for the roof, and 4 masonry walls for the perimeter. And it fills the entire plot. So a deep building. And as I said, we start literally without program, but also in a certain way without client. Firstly, we start a study for the city of Marseille that becomes the owner of the plot without any idea of what to do with it. So we start a kind of inventory, but for me it's already a kind of a project of an observation of an available accommodation of space and materials. And during the studies we met an art school that was interested to move into this old factory. But the building was a little bit big for their actual needs and their budget. And during the first discussion we decided to not talk about the program or how to adapt the building to a program. But we were able to look at intermediate projects. A project that tolerated the occupancy of a school without impeding the structural rules of the buildings. So kind of a project where the building could be a kind of a master and the occupant, let's say gently the slaves, just to deal with this kind of hierarchy. And also maybe because we met the building first. And by a very pragmatic approach, with a minimum of intervention, we propose to produce an interior order by dividing the free plan into a corridor distributing a set of rooms, more or less equal in terms of area, so detached from the pragmatic infill. So not really the invention of the year, it's quite a rudimentary project. It's no more flexible space as a free plan, but a very trivial organization where each room, in terms of capacity, could receive potentially a programmatic element of a school. Each room ready to become a drawing studio, a photo studio, a meeting room, the administration, or an exhibition room, or a mix of what you want. And so in a certain way, it's a project looking for the necessary and the sufficient, but not in a functional way. It's a definition of a spatial order for a kind of a let-it-go occupancy. And we repeat the same plan at the 3 level. So the school is a set of 3 corridors and 15 rooms. And even if you can inhabit it as you want, the question of the occupancy, it's not really our business here. It's a kind of active demission from our part for the benefit of possible appropriation after the construction work. So just fixing a rule of partition and distribution for a possible changing field. So the same plan, but different floors or different conditions, same in terms of measure, same in terms of quantity, but obviously different in terms of quality. So the ground floor corridor is obviously the whole entrance directly open to the streets. The first floor corridor is a windowless room, and the top floor corridor is a room with a glass canopy. And the same result with the other room. So at the end we have this collection of rooms defined by 2 added walls and 2 existing walls. So almost the same volumetry, but with different types of light and relation with the outside, depending from the nature of the isolated part of the existing perimeter. So with the same minimum equipment of electric outlet, airing and heating system, and wash basin in each room. So a set of all-purpose blank space defined by a separation. So that's a room with a large window, or a room with a narrow window, a room without window, or a room with 1 window, and so on. And so in a way we are looking for the most neutral device following the existing structure for the maximum variety of spaces, where each of them are specific qualities produced by this operation of division. So it's clearly a very simple project produced by just a short intention. But actually the school reboots often its organization and tests different teaching practice depending from how they learn to use it. So almost the same project, or rather the same approach, for a display, a scenography in the art center in Paris. And we didn't try to find any narrative link between the project and the content of the exhibition. It was only the question of space as a tool for the curators to organize the content of the exhibition. And unlike the previous project that followed the structural rules of the existing building, we divide arbitrarily the space as an axiom with 11 walls into 42 equal rooms. So we agreed as a natural measure. So a project with one rule that produces a variety of conditions by separation or rather by isolation. And it's a project of a partition, but not totally. It's a partition with a certain weakness, simply because the walls are small, 155 centimeters high. So you have always the simultaneously the consciousness of big space and small spaces. And what I'm interested in this kind of, let's say, drawing protocol, it's that it integrates some collateral accident, some semi-inventory situation. So it's part of the process, and sometimes it's productive and sometimes it's not. And so maybe it's not very productive, that footbridge. Just changing a footbridge by an obstruction, or useless handrail, or an internet upstairs, and so on. So accepting obstruction and see what's happened. But the main goal of the project is obviously not to produce just silly situation for just my own pleasure. It's above all a fragmented environment as a tool, where the curators could practice a fragmented speech, basically one room from one content, inhabited by one subject or one media, a furniture or a pre-existing element, without any hierarchy or with kind of indifference. So it's just a grid as a separation between a context and a content. And the next project, once again, the same starting point. It's a device as a natural division of space for variability of condition detached from a pragmatic infill. But here the context is quite different. It's a proposal for a closed competition for the Centre Georges Pompidou, and they wanted a mobile gallery, so a gallery that could sell everywhere. So kind of architecture without a clear context, or rather an architecture with a changing context. And literally, it could be also considered as an extension of the two existing exhibition structures. The Centre Pompidou in Paris in the 17th, and most recently the Centre Pompidou in Metz. And that's the current plan of the two buildings, and also two paradigms for the same subject. And I like plants, as Maria said before. I like plants, and probably also because it's my favorite tool, but for maybe several reasons. First of all, because every architect works with plants. It's a common tool. It's a basic tool, and because also the plant, just as a horizontal section, is nothing like that. Literally, the condition that you expect produce on an environment to inhabit it in terms of quantity, structure, distribution, limits, order, or tricks, with a kind of indifference to this representation. And especially because also the plan talks about the floors as a terrestrial surface, where it's possible to perform human activities. And as an extension, we propose literally more rooms without any programmatic distinction. So a grid of 36 rooms, or 36 square meters, which each of them could tolerate legally a maximum of 36 people. So it's a natural set of rooms without any hierarchy, any center, any boundary, except the quantity of area requested by the client, and technically defined by its ability to be moved by trucks. So a kind of deep structure available to absorb a changing context and content. But the grid is also a source of variability. So each room are equal in terms of surface, but different in terms of volume. and difference in terms of relation with this changing context, and so fully autonomous, fully dependent, fully controlled or partly controlled. So in certain way, in the same times, we accept and reject this notion of uniformity of space as an interior landscape, with this collection of possible rooms which define an availability of use through different adjacent small environments. And even the geometry is fixed. It's always possible to reprogram it. It's a support. And it accepts different configuration of exhibition. So it's a classical order between structure and infill, or hardware and software. And also without any temptation to be figurative or introduce any symbolic attachment. Just a tool determined by as a servile equipment. So the three previous projects question only an interior order as an act of separation in a limited world. And the next three share almost the same starting point in the countryside, a house near a lake. And I like plants, but I like also lakes. And I like lakes because they contain a certain picturesque value as a landscape element within always a kind of ambiguous state. Sometimes they are natural and sometimes they are artificial. And here in the picture, this one is an artificial lake in the Morvan, in the east center of France. And as an anthropogenic landscape, a man-made landscape, it contains kind of a huge and in a way virtuous shift in its mercantile use. The shift between a piece of a huge hydraulic network to provide firewood for the city of Paris during the 19th century, and the actual opportunity of a touristic development as a nautic base for holidays. And as a vestige of first use of the lake, it remains a few elements, a dam and a house. And the house looks like a little bourgeois mansion with its symmetric French harmony, a sort of little eccentricity, especially in an environment mostly occupied during the summer by seasonal restaurants and camping cars. But the mansion is not really a mansion. It was a tiny abandoned worksite camp for the engineer to survey the workers during the construction of the dam. So except the exercise of the symmetry, not really a big piece of architecture, not a big piece of history, just an available construction. And in the support of the touristic development, the community of village around the lake want to extend this house into a cultural and touristic equipment. So in informational booths with some exhibition space, a coffee, a shop, small offices, meeting rooms. So the generic specification of cultural and touristic small equipment. And the house has also a garden with a constructed relief and a few building in poor condition. And we were paying close attention to this seasonal use of the territory. During the summer it's full of tourists, and let's say that just during 3 or 4 months. And for the rest of the year it's close to a desert. So why provide a permanent equipment for mainly periodical use? And to answer this question, the project proposed to renovate and inhabit the 3 existing stone construction as a permanent and functional environment, and to add a bigger room that follows the seasonal climatic change. So a weak room, so a room in as an in-between environment. So a volume that it removes the wind, the rain, and the snow, but that is fully dependent to the change of the solar light and temperature. So it's a room not defined by the function, but by the changing terrestrial condition. So once again, not really an invention. We can call it in French the jardin d'hiver, or winter garden, a greenhouse, or a hothouse. So it's a glass house that isolates some elements of the existing landscape. a room where users are changing according to the season. No? A room that will be used not necessarily in the same way in summer and in winter. So the next project concerns a small villa along a natural lake near the French Alps. And again, a community village buy this plot and want to create touristic equipment to promote the lake. So almost the same situation that the previous project, but this time the client said that it will be better if we remove the villa. And we ask why, and simply they said that they don't like it. And for us, it's quite difficult to define something as ugly or beautiful. It becomes a question of taste, and actually I don't care a little bit about taste. Everybody has his own taste. And obviously it's almost impossible to include it as a parameter of a sharing project. And so as a starting point, we decide to keep it. So as a first rule, as a first constraint or first opportunity, as a condition that's already there as an available surface. But the villa was also too small for their ambition. They want offices, so small facilities, different exhibition space, coffee shop, and so on. So we need to create more space. And as I said before, for me, probably architecture could be defined by the relationship between the object than the object themselves. So we provide a bigger room, a room around the villa, to increase the area and define a new inhabited perimeter. So now we have two objects, one we found and one we choose, with their own specific qualities and capacities. So a combination of relation between two objects in a certain context, with the minimum of intervention, so just one intervention. The goal is to provoke the maximum opportunities. And in terms of qualities, we have now this collection of small rooms in the existing villa as a domestic landscape with these specular materials. Each room has a specific window, a balcony, a fireplace, a lot of elements that we probably never provide if we start with nothing less than just a specification of the program. And a bigger room, basically made by walls and a roof. And it's a room, but it's not really a room. It's a continuous space, but not an homogeneous space. The four wings are different thickness and have not relation with the outsides. And also we have this third space in between, not totally designed and not totally found. So kind of a collateral situation, a resulting space. An outdoor room occupied by the house, so a courtyard. And so after this little operation, it's now the question of the occupancy, how you can occupy this variety of spaces. So that's the ground floor with this big loop, like a Cicle around the house, where it's possible to provide the public facilities, an extension of the garden, the lake or the courtyard. And the courtyard could be also open to the public, and the existing house, it's possible to include some permanent function, storage and restroom. And that's the first floor on the house, where we can put the offices. So finally, you will work on the holiday house. So just a section. Simply this section with the existing house, the closed in between, the room around the villa and the rest. And the first floor above the gallery conserves the view of the lake. The house is just partly excluded. So here could be the gallery, where doors are also windows, with an exclusive relation with what sits behind these doors. And at the back of the image, a direct connection with the lake. On the right, the garden, and on the left, the courtyard. So after this causal succession, that's how we conceive a possible way to inhabit it. It's just mainly a question of furniture and uses. It's always possible to start over with different layouts. So view inside the garden, with the door to the gallery and behind the enclosure, the house. And a view from the opposite bank of the lake, where the question of taste, ugly or beautiful, becomes probably a dull dilemma. So the third project with an existing house near a lake, and the house is on an island on an artificial lake in the south center of France, and it's a young landscape. The lake was constructed in the 50s to provide electric power for the region. And in the 90s, the French Ministry of Culture decided to transform the island into an art park for sculpture, with an art center in the middle, actually designed by Aldo Rossi and Xavier Fabre. And near the art center, there is a house that was here before the lake, and the project was to transform it into an artist's residency as an extension of the art center. So it's a house, but it's not really a house. It's a small castle, or a house looked like a castle, kind of neo-Gothic pastiche of the end of the 19th century. And as a house, some function was already there, organized by a set of small rooms. It was possible to sleep or to cook. It was just missing the possibility of space for artists to work together. So studio, the problem of the studio and atelier. And so the project mainly looking for the definition of what could be a studio for a group of artists. And first of all, we tried to provide a bigger room, or the biggest room. But this time just by subtraction, following the morphology of the castle. So a room inside the castle, so it's the gray zone on the bottom of the plan. But with inside the room inside the castle, but with a certain autonomy to increase this capacity. It has its own entrance to provide direct connection with the park as an extension of the park. And across the entire castle, on every floor, and by subtraction, the resulting space still remains from the domestic uses, like here under the roof, 4 rooms converted into 3 apartments. So outside, or let's say from inside the park, there is no sign of an intervention. It's only a new door, the door of the studio. And it's mainly used as an atelier, but we propose during the studies to increase its capacity and the possibility of uses by changing its legal status into an exhibition space, a public space within ambiguous state, where artists works in their own exhibition space. And so finally the studio is not so big, just around 125 square meters. And it's a continuous space, qualified by a variety of small situations, with an outdoor part at the end, open to the climatic change. So literally it's snow, it's raining in part of the atelier, with the corner, a tight part, and a bigger part in the entrance. And finally, we consider the studio as a tool not determined by the function, but determined by the multiple condition and situation for the permanently changing uses, defined by its occupant at least every 3 months, every change in their residencies. And for the rest, the domestic part, we did the minimum of the transformation. So no more lake, but still an existing building on the river, and it's a project for a museum in the memory of the French poet Arthur Rimbaud. But we'll not talk about Rimbaud, it's not really the subject. We don't practice any narrative link between the content as a project. And it starts with this old watermill, but this time there is no question of do we need to keep it or not. The building is an historical monument, or to be more precise, the facade and the roof are registered in the list of the historical monuments. So the Ministry of the Culture has decided for the client and for us. But this typical French registration doesn't have so much interest in space, only for the element of the construction, a roof and one facade. But okay, it's okay. Architecture is already there. We don't want to try to negotiate with it. We don't want to try the risky exercise for physical extension. Probably it's a game lost in advance, even if it's possible to act on the other part of the building. And we know that the project at this time will concern only the volume inside the building, so kind of a non-visible project. But we were a little bit frustrated by the area developed in the watermill. It was a big volume but small surfaces. So we decided to increase the area, to double the surface of the area in the perimeter of the watermill. And this simple goal becomes just the entire project, a project just about quantities, to propose an architecture inside another one by increasing the area. Just a question of quantity with the own structure, its own syntax. And after removing the 3 existing floors, we add 6 levels in the bigger volume, and we leave the second volume free. So that first model we did, sort of shelves as an available storage as a museum, where it's probably possible to perform activities and develop a story about Raynaud. And so now we have these 2 rooms, empty rooms and filled rooms. And yeah, the autonomy of the structure. So in a massive construction, we choose a wireframe construction for technical reason, but also as a starting point for an organization. It's already an order with a grid of columns, repeating 6 times a small free plan. And at this time for us, the job is over. It's as a definition of a project. To define an architecture as a support, as a substructure, where it's possible to perform, where it's possible to use it with a kind of indifference. But yeah, of course we care also a little bit about how it's possible to use it. But it's the matter of the content. It's open to different typologies as a cyclical situation. So we tried some possibilities, or maybe we try to find all the possibilities as archetypes, with some silly option, like full of corridors, big rooms and small rooms, and so on. So on the ground floor, an environment as a concomitance of the 2 structures. A possible current floors, a possible floor with walls, and always never touch the existing building. So the structure is just tolerate as a guest. It's probably not a permanent architecture. And it could also accept another degree of autonomy as a house in a house in a house. And that's the last model we did with a possible combination of an occupancy. The project will, let's say, with a full option. So another short story about the limits. A small village in the south of France, crossed by the old canal of Marseille, and today it's no longer used. And there is a new one, and it's in the south of the image. And so it's a dry canal. It's an abandoned infrastructure, a neglected object, but still a component of the landscape. And abandoned doesn't mean without qualities. It's a spontaneous linear garden defined by this pre-existing infrastructure. And the village wants to connect the town hall on the north bank of the canal to the bus station on the south bank of the canal, with a shortcut crossing the canal. So it's a project of a footbridge. But also they want to transform the backyard of this town hall into a sort of public square, which in a certain way already exists, clearly defined with small walls, with some furniture, some trees on the stabilized ground. And to answer these 2 requests, we propose one project, a reversal project, whereby the site becomes the matrix of the project, while the program is used as a reading instrument. So not really a footbridge and not really a public square, a bit of both, defined by a simple structure without a technical issue, surface included into the canal. An object that connects the two banks of the canal, and again, an object as an elevator surface for a collective occupancy, just under the trees and inside the canal. Yeah, a bit of old-fashioned Paris. Yeah, regular inside irregular. Maybe you can have a look to the Hôtel Particulier in Paris through this reduced definition of how to deal with the limit as a technical tricks to fill Parisian plot. A regular courtyard which organizes the rest inside an irregular perimeter, and the primacy of outer room on a set of indoor rooms. And it's a look detached from any interpretative temptation, just technical skills to start to work on an introverted plot in the west of Paris. And the project was a proposal for the competition, for the construction of 25 apartments. And they organized this competition after losing their right to build a previous project for some legal reason. Actually, the neighbors broke up the permits. And the previous project could be defined as a block in the middle of the plot. Just a compact object dropped on the plot, a solitary object. And that was the opportunity to propose exactly the opposite, to delimitate a void that could provide a certain thickness as an inhabited perimeter where the facade also are the structure. A courtyard which gives access to 4 stairs in the 4 angles and distribute 25 apartments. Yeah, several floors. And a way to deal with the request of the client, to filling the structure with compact typology, but at least with a window in each room. So just an idea of what it could be, maybe not more than just a typical Parisian courtyard. And from the streets, just a tiny building between others without any information or facility inside the plot. So still in Paris, a small project in a support of bigger transformation of a district along the La Petite Ceinture, the small belt. And so it's an abandoned railway surrounded Paris. And in this area, it will transform into a park, a linear park. And it's an heterogeneous context with big housing blocks from the 70s, huge public equipment like a hospital, and new housing block under construction. So it's a small building surrounded by big buildings. And the main difficulties is to anticipate a project on the site partly under development without defined plot. But it's also an opportunity to define its own context by the interior of the project, just starting from the inside. So it's an equipment, but maybe I prefer to look at it as a house for 9 gardeners, a house without bedrooms, but with a kitchen, a washroom, 2 clockrooms, and a workshop. And so we start with a square, 10 by 10, so a project without front or a back. And a square divided into 4 main rooms, half defined by the structure and half defined by the perimeter of the square. So 2 structural walls that support a rooftop and a non-structural perimeter. So quite simple, binary definition between the structure and infill, partly massive and partly framed, partly construct on site and partly prefab. So concrete and wood frame, painted in green. And the project also along the park, so it's clearly in the public space. So and as a square, it has obviously 4 sides, so 4 relations with the public space. So on the north, a window in front of the park. On the west, a small outdoor rooms at an entrance of the domestic part. On the south, a bigger outdoor room as an extension and access to the workshop. And at the east, the facade becomes a public bank along the street. So a little bit like this, a tiny house. And a view from the future neighbors. Small buildings surrounded by big buildings. So last project I will show you. It's a project about the park. So no more old buildings as a starting point. But in a way it's still the same story. An existing park, a park in the city. And it's in the city of Tirana in Albania. And one of the particularities of the city of Tirana is that it seems to be constructed on around 2 very opposite urban fabric. Yeah. The first one is completely ruled by the face in an order that can be planned in projects on the world through a limited number of projects. Very strong in their intention in the middle of the 20th century. Project that define urban organization as a rational order, clearly a modern project. And the second seems on the opposite, moved by spontaneous tendencies. Tirana was isolated until the 90s and suddenly entered a new phase of development, while major corporations multiply the ground with real estate development and population starts to build illegal structure where it can lay down the brick. And at the park of Tirana, and it's clearly a modern project. It's built in the 50s around an artificial lake. And its limits is often a little bit ambiguous, ready to be appropriated by anyone. And the project is a proposal for a closed competition, and the brief of the competition was to reorganize the northwest of the park. So a blurry territory, a mix of fenced wasteland and undefined threshold between the park and the city. A blurry territory identified as an opportunity to add new buildings. And if you follow the brief, probably a set of isolated buildings that increase this ambiguous state of the park and its border. So quite a huge project that turned into a kind of a contradiction. And by refusing this programmatic approach on a territory that couldn't be considered as a blank space, open to real estate development, we pay close attention to the limit between the city and the park. And the project is to reaffirm a clear border, but neither one it's designed as a master plan with a modern attitude. Let's say from the political, or nor is it an informal project mimicking the vernacular fabric, let's say the interpretative one. And we try to produce a project adaptable to the structural versatility of the city. A project of a negotiation, but without frustration. Firstly, as a little tricks with a shift, we just shift the planned street and use it at the first border. And a shift that gives a certain thickness on the north belonging to the city, available on an inhabited border. A shift that accepts at this stage a sort of construction, but surely not older construction, so limited in its capacity. A construction along the park and not in the park, and takes advantage of this apparently banal situation. So a construction ready to accept a public program as part of the request. And so after this first step, we proposed the production of an intrinsic approach to the border, generate from within its own thickness, as a sum of singular local co-boarding devices. So at the same time, the project becomes a set of projects without a predefined coherence between them. Only the definition of a border through a set of variety of existing, alterated or provoked situation as a local singularities. Like the project questioning an existing infrastructure, a dam has a materialized limit, which is possible to look at a linear support along the lake, which is possible to increase also its occupancy by its particular condition. Looking at the spore field, never used because it's fenced, and transform it into a public field just by removing the fence. A project of reusing existing construction, even if they are in the park as an exception of the primary rules. A project of a threshold, where it's possible to activate the ground. A project of an openness, where the back of a building doesn't have access to the park. So a set of projects without a predefined coherence between them, only the definition of a border through a set of variety of existing, altered or provoked situation as a local singularities. And by consequence, sparing, saving territories introduce a new project, the resulting extension of the park. And if we are looking closely at what we already have, there is not much to do to define it as a part of the park. And so after winning this competition, the project is still on the intense discussion. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Okay, if you have any question to ask Thomas, or you prefer, we can go for a drink, as always. We have beers now. And of course you can ask, you can chat with him with the beer, so maybe it could be easy. Remember that the next lecture will be 20th of June by the builder, Jean the Builder. So thank you.